5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast, episode number 68. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, and company culture to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to the show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create these positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience. And this is what the show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Kerri Warner, Vice President of Employee Communications, Worldwide Marketing and Communications for Mastercard. Today with Kerri, we talk about what she learned from various marketing and HR roles that led her to her current role at Mastercard, how Mastercard approaches internal communications in today's world where employees consume content in different shapes and forms, how she balances editorial planning with on-the-fly demands to create and curate content, how she measures not only the level of engagement for the content her team creates, but also the impact on business performance, and finally, how she sees employee communications evolve in the next 5 years. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Kerri. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it will help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at @EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Today's guest is Kerri Warner. She's calling from the New York City area, and she is the Vice President of Employee Communications, Worldwide Marketing and Communications at a company that some of you may know about, Mastercard. Kerri, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephen.
So you have quite an interesting background with a mix of marketing and human resources roles over the years. So what have you learned from both functions that led you to your current role at Mastercard?
Right. So a great question. You know, I'd add in actually that yes, HR and marketing. I also did some work earlier in my career in management consulting, and my first career was actually as a clinical social worker, all of which gave me what I think was an amazing set of skills to be able to be in communications. They all led me to where I am because I think at the core of being successful in each of those areas and learning all of those things was threading sort of words and ideas together in a way that was both genuine and candid, influential, helpful, and just sort of very, very respectful of where people were coming from, so that I could drive whether change in perceptions, change in strategy, change in personal circumstances, so helping to sort of foster something new or different. So I think I finally realized that I had a love of those other things, plus a love of writing and leading a team, and so that focus on communications became a terrific role for me and led me to this wonderful opportunity that I have here at Mastercard.
It's quite an interesting background, yes. So as you mentioned, so you joined Mastercard recently. What are your current responsibilities within the company?
Yes, so I joined Mastercard back in March of 2018. And together with my team, we do a few different things. So we are responsible for sure for content strategy and execution across all of our global communication channels, which touched a little bit north of 16,000 employees around the world. So this would include the intranet, our electronic bulletin boards, which are essentially TVs that are in multiple locations around the world. So as employees are walking by, they see these screens that give them information and invite them to potentially an event or something of that nature. We share executive quotes on those things and so forth. Also employee webcasts. All employee webcasts, employee podcasts, which are increasingly popular here, event series that we do, and of course we have our Employee Ambassadors Program, which we call SOPROS, social professionals, because it really involves employees linking their own social channels to news feeds about MasterCard that we think will be interesting for them and valuable to their social communities. And in addition, I support the HR organization and our chief HR officer, Michael Fracaro.
So you mentioned about 16,000 employees worldwide. How many offices and regions are you in?
So we are in over 200. We operate in over 200 locations around the world, 200 offices rather around the world.
What is the main? I assume that English is the main language of communication, but you guys translate or cater some of the messaging around based on different cultural influences?
Right. So I have regional counterparts in the different regions around the world. So I have a counterpart who is responsible for communications, more bespoke communications, internal and external, that support our regional leaders within Latin America, Middle East, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And so those folks work to do whatever translations might be necessary or helpful. But you are right in that, the language that is our primary language is English, and that is the language that our executives who are across, who are a diverse group of executives from countries outside of the United States as well as inside, that while they're multilingual, the language that we use is English.
Okay, so it's no surprise to anyone that the way we consume content now has drastically changed over the years, and with the multiplications of our own personal devices, the rise of social media channels, as you mentioned, and the ability for brands to deliver more personalized experiences and messages. So how do you approach employee communications at Mastercard? And have you seen, obviously, even though you're recent at Mastercard itself, but have you seen that the organization has looked at employee communications a bit differently recently?
Yeah, so I love that question. I mean, I think that we are educating our company about how to think and see employee communications or our enterprise-wide communications. So we're right now evolving our existing channels such as the internet, to become much more customized for employees. So they can certainly then join and follow online communities that are of most importance and interest to them. Of course, we use, as I mentioned, relatively newer technologies like the technical platform that is our SoPros, that our SoPros use in order to deliver content to employees that they want to see through a simple content categorization feature that's built into the solution. So if I'm an employee and I'm really interested in our inclusive growth kinds of content or our cybersecurity, whatever those different categories might be, we have a few within our platform that employees can get, and then they can share out, again, to their social channels, or they can receive everything and decide in the moment what it is that they want to share. And then we also try to ask employees a lot of questions. I mean, we're fortunate. Employees are my favorite stakeholders, and, we're very fortunate in that our customers are right here with us every day, both whether we're at headquarters or any of my team is traveling. We have an opportunity to get real-time feedback. What do they want to see? What are they seeing too much of? And where we find common themes, we address those and then try to deliver the content that is most meaningful to them. Shortly after I got here, we put together an employee exchange. I was given a list of people to speak with who I could learn from and get to know, business colleagues and stakeholders, as well as my communication colleagues around the world. But nobody said, go speak with these employees, and so, or go speak for a handful of employees. And so it seemed as though that was something that we decided, my team decided and put together to get a good cross-section of employees and hear more from them about their preferences.
It's a very good point, because many companies still see internal employee communications as a top-down channel where I would say the leaders decide what is important for the employees to know about, but not so much about what employees really want to hear and learn from the organization itself. And we see a lot of conflicts or disinterest and disengagement from the employee side on what type of messages and communications is distributed to them from the organization itself. So it's interesting to see that you guys actually have gathered feedback from employees to really understand what type of content they want to consume.
Yes, Stephen, you raised such an interesting point, and I think what is a bit of tension for the internal function that has sort of is answering to both employees and is needing to be sort of an advocate for what employees as our customers want to hear and what the business wants to say, which sometimes is not necessarily what employees are interested in. Mm-hmm. We do very little email here in terms of broad distribution of emails, but what we do is we have ample places on our internal channels, and our executives and business lines are very engaged in our internal channels to be able to get their content out that way. At the same time, I'm very fortunate in that, Mastercard is very much a company about doing well by doing good. And we being a force for good in the world, having a decency quotient. And so all of those things, there are many rich stories behind that our employees are happy to share. And so we're able to have a nice balance on our channels of both true business-driven content and stuff that we know is really of great interest to employees. And oftentimes they're both, but not always. So we sort of make it all available to employees.
It's interesting because recently I had on this podcast Carmen Collins from Cisco, and she oversees social media and she's part of the employer branding team. And Cisco is using a lot of what they call EGC, employee-generated content. That it's not so much the organization driving what type of stories should be shared to, and that's mostly to the candidates, not to the current employees. But it's more about, what employees want to share and what want to talk about. And those all generate their own stories and share their own content versus something that is more corporate branding. So it's interesting that
Yes.
Mastercard is doing something similar as well, where they leverage, or you guys leverage your employees so that they can share their own stories from their own perspectives, not from a corporate perspective.
That's right, and we do that very much as well. I partner closely with our HR organization, and so through different channels that they primarily manage, we bring in employee voices. We sometimes will have even an employee sort of takeover of Instagram or Twitter or a candidate, and we can and that they are really driving the content. The other thing we do, of course, is the team has employee podcasts, and we have podcasts where we talk to leaders about what's happening in their businesses and things that are sort of get to know the leader a little bit more. Those are all available on through streaming platforms like Stitcher and iTunes and Google Play, and so anyone can really get a lens into the company by listening to these podcasts. We have one called What's Next In. We have some others that are pushed out traditionally more externally, but everything really we do externally. We think about always, what is how can we also amplify this internally? So we have change makers. We have, Fortune Favors the Bold. The next season of that is coming up. So we have a number of things that give employees or candidates a lens into what it's really like at the company through the voices of employees. And we'll launch a new one in January called Inside the Circles.
Oh, so you mentioned
the Mastercard Circle.
Right. So you mentioned. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Kerri.
No, I was just going to say the Inside the Circles, the change makers, the What's Next In, those are all podcasts that are really for employees. Well, What's Next In for employees, Inside the Circle for employees. But we recognize that, they're available on platforms that are external, and we encourage people who are considering MasterCard or who are interested in what MasterCard's doing, or frankly, just interested in topics around courage and leadership and decision-making, as well as things like how are we helping to make smarter cities a reality in various places around the world. Why is that critical to the future of our how we think about technology and data and customer experience? So it's a really nice mix, and it gives people a deeper lens into what it is that we're doing today, and more importantly, how we're thinking about the future.
Yeah, and that's a very good point too, because that gives job candidates, prospects, an opportunity to have a glimpse of what it's like to work at Mastercard from an insider point of view.
Exactly, which, no interview or brochure or, sort of cruising around websites, and even, Glassdoor or other sites of that nature can be helpful, but you really want to hear, more, I think, through what it's like by hearing from people who work there.
Yeah. So you mentioned podcasts that are available as a communication tool. You said that Mastercard uses very limited mass email communication for corporate messaging. What are some of the other channels and some of the tools that you use to disseminate your communications and your content to the employees?
Yes, so we have webcasts after our earnings are released. We hold global webcasts that are aired around the world and also recorded. We play them on our internal MCTV channel for employees to either watch or participate in. We also, as I mentioned, have an intranet site that is going through a redesign and a name change, but right now we call it MC Central. That is where we have blogs that anybody can submit. We have images and information about themes around MasterCard all over the world that we encourage employees everywhere to submit, and they do. We also have events that we hold both here at headquarters and all over the world that we showcase. And then other channels are, of course, we have news and announcements that are front and center on our homepage. And that is where many people go for information and timely messages. Of course, as an employee communications function, we still do on occasion send out emails, but very few and far between. When we are launching, we launched a very large sponsorship this year with the League of Legends. We announced that through email to get employees excited about it, along with a short video. We also announced a partnership with Microsoft. That came through email. But by and large, we stay away from email, and we use other kinds of channels, like the ones I just mentioned.
Okay. Now, another challenge that many organizations face is that they often manage or look at internal communications more reactively, saying, oh, something happened and we just have to respond or to be able to react to whatever happened. Or the last minute, this is what we want our employees to know. But there's no real planning well ahead of time like you would have on with external communications and truly marketing or editorial plan. So my question to you is, do you develop an editorial plan for the year or for the upcoming quarter? Or do you develop content on the fly based on immediate needs or circumstances?
So the answer is yes, yes to both. I think, every communicator would love to have a plan and, go about their day and be executing the plan and just spending the whatever remainder of time they might happen to have thinking about new ideas. But the reality is we do develop an editorial plan. We have kind of key content anchors, which really are the business imperatives, the business priorities. Our content is directly tied to those, as you would expect. And at the same time, we do get many people come to us and say, we need to get this up. We're doing this, we're doing that. And then it's up for us to really determine, is that something that we can react quickly to and that we should? We certainly can, but that is not the mode we want to be operating in. And, whenever someone says something is urgent, it usually to me is a sign that it may not be important. And so what I'm trying to do and our team is trying to do is really focus on getting the stuff out there that's important and knowing when something is truly urgent, which is usually more, frankly, around our responses to disasters. And we do a number of things that invite employees in to go down to situations and help, and we need to sort of activate people quickly. So we're happy to turn those kinds of things around, on a moment's notice. And we have an editorial plan that isn't so detailed, because we know the reality is that we have to be more fluid and dynamic than that, and we're happy to be.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a bit about what your team does and how big your team is. Even maybe talk about budget as well, because there's always the question, when people look at either doing or building a internal communication team or employer branding team, whatever it might be. It's how big of a team do we need? So how much do we need to invest? Do we need to invest in video equipment? Do we need to invest in audio equipment? How hard it is to put together a webcast or a podcast. So let's talk about your team a little bit. How big is your team, and what is the background of your team members?
Sure. So I have a very mighty team of 6, and then I tap into others across our broader communications team when a particular project requires it. We collaborate all the time. I work very closely with my digital colleague and my external colleague. And just for clarity, while I focus on enterprise-wide internal employee communications, I have a counterpart who has teams that are directly aligned to our different business units, and they do internal communications for that particular business leader or business line, as well as external thought leadership, pitching, etc. And then we have someone else who is focused on the digital, the LinkedIn, our Mastercard newsroom, some of our externally specific podcasts. So my team of 6 has a very varied background, which I love. I've got a former newspaper journalist, someone who is spent years doing large-scale events. I've got digital stars. I've got a tech and metrics guru, and then I've got solid writers, which is really kind of table stakes for most of what we do. That's something that however forward we go and evolve as a technology company, words matter, language matters, and being able to write well is something that I think will always be necessary as long as people crave simplicity and understanding. So that's the team that I have, but we also have things, as you mentioned, we work with vendors, of course, to make our webcasts go seamlessly around the world. We have what's called our Story Lab, our Mastercard branded Story Lab, which is right in the communications area that I sit with my colleagues, and that contains a lot of our own podcasting equipment where we bring in guests to actually host our podcasts. And so that's got a lot of editing, audio, video, and editing equipment in there. And we made a, intentional decision to make that an investment versus, use a vendor for that, because we knew that this was something that we wanted to do for the long term.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. I know the answer, or I have a very good idea, but I wanted to stress this out, because you said we are a technology company. But what do you mean by this? You don't make credit card anymore?
So we do make cards. It's interesting. I think that is the biggest misperception that people have when they think about Mastercard for many people anyway. So I think a lot of people think that Mastercard is just a credit card company and that they also issue these Mastercards, and people who walk around with Mastercards that's sort of what the company does. The fact of the matter is that Mastercard really is a technology company that enables transactions all over the world. So we are a B2B company, of course. Our primary advantage is our network, the network that we have around the world that runs through this network runs, billions of transactions all the time. In addition to that network being used for credit card transactions, these credit cards, by the way, are issued by our banks, by our bank partners. Right. So we're a B2B company, right? We work with merchants, we work with banks, we work with governments. But if you think about other things that we do, the company really is very focused on financial inclusion. So through the network that we have, for example, we are able to help humanitarian agencies distribute aid in a way that is safe and secure for those on the receiving end, and sort of reimagining how that works so that the people who are intended to reap the benefit of that indeed do. And that's probably a whole nother conversation, but these are other ways and many other things that our company does. We don't actually issue any credit cards. So, we try to certainly impact the consumer experience, which is why we also think about the type of sponsorships that we do, but we are not a credit card company. We use our data and our technology to do a number of things that again make cities run better, get humanitarian aid to where it belongs, and of course we get we get transaction fees through our credit cards, of course.
Right. So even though it's not your area, I understand that, but do you see some some discrepancy or some disconnection between what maybe the general public may have of Mastercard and what the company is really, and when it comes to roughly at the same time attracting people to come to the company, as well as getting employees understand the purpose and the mission of Mastercard beyond just what the general public perception might be. So there's a sort of employee branding side of it, internal communication side to it too.
Yes, I definitely do. So we spend a lot of time on campuses and in other places to educate potential, to educate candidates and inspire candidates about the kinds of work that people can do here at Mastercard, about the kind of company we are, and about the opportunities that exist. And so we are very purposeful in how we do that, and how we lead with that in conversations. The other part of that is that once, and I think this is the part that's a bit of a surprise to people based on my conversations with people who are here, is that this company, unlike many companies, or some companies anyway, that have a lot of vision and values on websites and that it's discussed in interviews and everything else, when you get to Mastercard, you see how core it is to everything that the company does. It's really a part of the DNA. And everything like, even the company gives 5 days off to employees just for volunteer work, because we so believe that we need to be, and we are a force for good in the world, and that's an important role that business needs to play. And so time is allotted just for that. There are so many different things that we do as well, and our partnerships with the World Food Program, with many, many others that really advance that force for good, doing well by doing good, meaning that the company will do well as we do good. We cannot only be in business to do good, or we wouldn't have the funds to be able to support all the things we want to do. But what we can do is think in new ways about how to help those who are underserved, underbanked, and don't have an identity. And when people have a financial and a identity, they are able to move themselves up, and that kind of financial inclusion is good for everyone. And so that's a lot of the work that we do that you see much more once you're in the company, and in pockets externally, but not as much as we need to do and will do.
Now, another question too, and obviously the marketing background can really help with that too. It's nice to be able to create compelling stories but how do you measure not only the level of engagement with the content that your team creates, but also what impact it has on the business performance? Because if you think of, let's say, podcasts, and you push out a podcast and you have 60% of listeners getting, and 60% of the employees listening to the podcast. It's pretty high level of engagement. So you can easily measure that. But how do you tie it to any type of business performance based on either the department or the business unit they are in, or the role they are in? So there's the engagement data that is important to measure, but most of all, does it have any impact on the performance of the business and the individuals? So what do you guys do in that area?
Yeah, I mean, this is always the toughest thing for communicators, right? And it's also part of the reason why I think very broadly about this. I also think that at its most fundamental level, one has to believe that communications, sort of done right, is the right thing to do. That being said, we do a couple things as we think about metrics. So one is we ask the right questions. We establish our mission as a team as using, driving business performance and a world-class culture through communications that inspire, educate, connect, and engage employees. And so those four things are sort of why we exist. So then we go back to ask questions. For example, for an event that we had around our sustainability initiatives and what we are doing around sustainability, we asked the right questions to our employees afterwards. Rate what you knew about this topic before you joined the session. Rate your level of knowledge afterwards. Does what you learned help you in your job? Will you do something differently as a result? Those are the kinds of things that I'm curious about, that my team is curious about. So that's of course, it's self-reporting. Of course, it's not everybody, but it's something. We couple that. We look at metrics of the kinds of content that gets read, that gets shared, that gets liked. We look at the pull we get to be part of what it is we're trying to do, and we see levels of engagement there. And I guess I would say, we really look at as well the employee engagement measures that we have and long-term business performance. So, driving engagement is really our what we're trying to do with everything that we are putting out there or inviting in to so that employees are really part of the experience versus being, on the other end of it. And our employee engagement scores here at Mastercard are quite high, and they continue to climb. Our recommend, Mastercard as a place to work, is north of 90%. So we believe that we have a role in helping to drive that perception and that reality, frankly.
Maybe the toughest question of all coming up here is, so you've been in that space for quite some time, but how do you see employee communications evolve in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Yeah, it's a fun question I think about. I think even the term employee communications as a position is something that could go away in 5 years. And I know we talk a lot about engagement, but I really think that employee communication is sort of, if you think about the spectrum, employee communication is like one step after just information sharing. And so, we have to do what it is we do with consumers, which is create really sticky experiences that, as I said, inspire, engage, educate, and connect employees. Again, my team's mission, but communication as it's been traditionally defined can't do that through messaging alone. And so I think we will move to really sort of employee engagement and experiences, of which communications is a part of the equation, but very much buoyed by other things because it's just more impactful.
Very interesting. So sort of contextual experiences based on a specific topic or specific story or message. So what do you have anything in mind, for instance, that you're doing now that is at the forefront of that movement or that evolution?
Well, you brought up budget before, and now it's the perfect time for me to sort of circle back to that. But my team has very little budget. We have amazing ideas, but like many internal teams, I think there's budget for marketing, there's budget for external and digital, and sometimes the budget sort of gets smaller as you move more internally focused, and I understand that. That being said, there are interesting things that we do. So when we think about our League of Legends partnership, the League of Legends, of course, is sort of e-gaming for those who are interested in that. But e-gaming is something that is becoming more and more popular with many. And so when you think about, what can you do well beyond communicating something about, hey, Mastercard is now partnering with League of Legends. Well, you can create experiences for employees all over the world that either have some gaming stations that invite employees in to learn more without having an experience of the game, but just bringing in the kind of snack carts and things you would find at a live event. You can have holograms on your floor. You can have your executives dressed up as League of Legends characters. I mean, all these kinds of things. They sound perhaps maybe a little bit silly, but what I think the point is that you think about both the physical and the digital experience. You think about things that are tangible. You think about the things that are sort of rational. So give me an information session because I'm someone who's never going to game, but I just want to understand it because my kids do, to, hey, we've got a whole group of people at Mastercard who love gaming. And so let's have them take the lead in creating and managing a community of gamers and make that a little competitive around the world. So we can do that too. So it's really thinking very holistically about what kinds of experiences would be interesting. And all of those have a foundation of very clear, crisp, and engaging communications, but that they each the different experiences appeal to people in different ways and based on different interests.
It's a good example because it's a way actually to engage employees and have them being part of creating something new within the organization. So it's not just about drafting communication from top to bottom. It's getting employees engaged and sort of more of a grassroots effort to get people participating in those communications efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think employees are really a brand's most, often overlooked but most credible stakeholders and advocates for the brand. So to the extent that you can engage them, you can engage 1,000 people in understanding what it is we're getting involved in and why, and the features and the benefits of it. They're going to be at soccer matches and at baseball games and in the grocery store and wherever it might be, and they're having conversations every day, online and offline, and they influence all of those around them. And so to the extent that they can help tell our story, we would be, it would be silly for us to overlook this. And of course, that's what I think about every day. And I think we will begin to see more of that at large. And many companies are doing it already quite well. And we are, we are doing it well, and you have so much more opportunity to grow to do more of that.
Excellent. Before we wrap it up for today, let me ask you some fun questions and rapid fire questions, and then we'll conclude this conversation today. But if you were to invite someone famous or a historical figure to dinner, who would you pick and why?
Oh my gosh, so many. I would say maybe Eleanor Roosevelt. She made such a significant contribution to human rights, and that's as relevant today as it's ever been.
All right. As we discussed at the beginning of this podcast, you've held various positions over the years. What was your dream job growing up as a kid?
I always wanted to be an FBI agent. I'm curious. I'm incredibly curious. I like to move around, and I like to solve problems, and I like to chat with people. So I think that would be fun. I always thought that would be fun when I was a kid.
That's quite unusual. What is the essential item that you always take with you when you go on vacation?
My husband.
All right, your husband. All right. Do you travel a lot with your work?
I don't travel too much for work. Here and there, I do.
All right. So, well, let's go with that question. What is your favorite food and why?
So my favorite food has got to be sushi. It's fresh, it's delicious, it's usually presented in a very lovely way, and it never takes long to arrive to the table, which is particularly helpful when you have two children, two hungry children with you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And last question, what word of advice would you give to someone who would like to join Mastercard?
If you want to make an impact, if you are willing to work hard, if you have passion, and if you are a decent, kind person and like to have some fun, come to Mastercard. There is so much opportunity, and there is so much receptivity to that.
Very good. What is the way for our listeners to follow you and Mastercard on social media?
So to follow Mastercard at Mastercard News is where sort of all of our information is curated, and people can go and see what we have out there. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I admit I am on Twitter, but I am not really one who tweets too much. I would say I'm more active on LinkedIn.
Okay. All right. And any last word of wisdom?
Oh, goodness. I would just, say what has been shared with me, which is, if you take good care of the present, there is no need to worry about the future. And, I think so much of what we do, we are either, thinking about or regretting something in the past or concerned about the future, and we miss out on what's sort of right in front of us. And that is where really we can, where we can make an impact. And if we do that right, then things will unfold exactly, I think, more often than not anyway, exactly the way that they should. So that's it. I mean, that's probably not it, but given the length of the podcast, it's probably good enough for now.
No, it's a nice way to wrap it up. Well, thank you so much, Kerri. It's been a pleasure of having you on the show.
Stephen, thank you so much. It has been my pleasure to chat with you.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.